I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd fall for someone in power. Growing up in a small town in Virginia, politicians were just faces on TV screens, people who made promises they never kept. But that was before I met Senator Marcus Hale, before I understood that the man everyone feared in those marble halls was someone entirely different when the doors closed and the cameras turned away. The first time I saw him in person, I was 26 years old, working as a legislative aide for a junior congressman who barely knew my name. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, one of those humid Washington days where your shirt sticks to your back the moment you step outside. I was rushing through the Russell Senate office building, arms full of briefing documents I was already late delivering, when I turned a corner and walked straight into what felt like a brick wall. Papers exploded everywhere, scattering across the polished marble floor like autumn leaves. I dropped to my knees immediately, mortified, my face burning as I scrambled to gather everything. That's when I heard his voice for the first time, not through speakers or television, but right there, close enough to feel the warmth of it. "Let me help you with that." The voice was deeper than I expected, with a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and too much coffee. I looked up and my breath caught in my throat. Senator Marcus Hale was kneeling beside me, his expensive suit jacket pooling on the floor as he collected my scattered papers with careful, methodical movements. Up close, he was even more striking than his photographs suggested. He had to be in his early 40s, with steel gray hair that was just starting to silver at the temples, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of storm clouds. But it was his hands I noticed most, strong and elegant, a small scar running across his left knuckle. "Senator, I'm so sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going." The words tumbled out of me in a rush. Everyone knew who Marcus Hale was, the man who'd taken down 3 corrupt lobbyists in his first term, the senator who'd made grown men cry during committee hearings with nothing but his questions and that penetrating stare. They called him the Ice King on Capitol Hill, said he never smiled, never showed weakness, never let anyone see past the armor. "Neither was I," he said simply, handing me a stack of papers. Our fingers brushed for just a second, and I felt something electric pass between us, so quick I thought I'd imagined it. He stood, offering me his hand. I took it, and he pulled me to my feet with surprising gentleness. For a moment we just stood there, his hand still holding mine, and I saw something flicker across his face, something that looked almost like recognition, though we'd never met before. "Thank you, Senator," I managed, finally pulling my hand away. He nodded, his expression already shifting back into that famous neutrality, that mask everyone knew. He adjusted his tie, gave me the briefest of nods, and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely, watching him disappear around the corner. I told myself it was nothing, just a random encounter in a building full of random encounters. But that night, lying in my tiny studio apartment in Arlington, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd knelt beside me without hesitation, the gentle way he'd gathered my papers, that flicker of something human in his eyes before the mask came back down. 3 weeks later, I saw him again. This time it was at a congressional mixer, one of those painful networking events where junior staffers like me nursed cheap wine and tried to make connections that might actually matter. I was standing by the window, looking out at the Washington Monument lit up against the night sky, trying to work up the courage to approach a senior aide who might put in a good word for me, when I felt someone beside me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" His voice made me turn so fast I nearly spilled my wine. Marcus Hale stood there, holding a glass of what looked like scotch, his tie loosened just slightly. He wasn't looking at me, but out at the monument, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it in the news. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. I never get tired of that view. We stood in silence for a moment, and I was acutely aware of how close he was, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that reminded me of cedar and rain. "You're the young man who nearly knocked me over in Russell," he said, and there was the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. "Legislative aide, right? For Congressman Patterson?" I was shocked he remembered, shocked he'd apparently bothered to find out who I was. "Yes, sir. My name's Daniel. Daniel Chen." I extended my hand, trying to project a confidence I absolutely did not feel. He took it, his grip firm but not aggressive, and this time, when our hands touched, that electric feeling was unmistakable. His eyes met mine, and for just a second, I saw the mask slip again, saw something raw and hungry and scared all at once. "Marcus," he said quietly. "When we're not in those halls, you can call me Marcus." The intimacy of that offer, the way he said it like he was sharing a secret, made my pulse quicken. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, about nothing and everything. He asked about my background, seemed genuinely interested when I told him about growing up in Virginia, about my parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan and worked themselves to exhaustion to put me through college. I asked him about a bill he was working on, and he actually listened to my thoughts, didn't dismiss me the way so many senior politicians did with junior staffers. When someone called his name from across the room, I saw him tense, saw the mask slide back into place with practiced ease. "I should go," he said, but he hesitated like he didn't really want to. "It was good talking to you, Daniel." The way he said my name, soft and careful, like he was tasting it, made something warm unfurl in my chest. "You too, Senator. Marcus." I watched him walk away, watched him transform back into the Ice King, all sharp edges and cold authority. But I'd seen beneath it now just for a moment, and I couldn't unsee it. After that night, I started noticing him everywhere. In the hallways, at hearings, in the cafeteria where he'd sit alone with his coffee and his briefing books, a wall of "don't approach me" radiating from him that everyone seemed to respect. Everyone except me. I found excuses to walk past his office, told myself I was just curious, just intrigued by the contradiction between the public Marcus and the private one I'd glimpsed. It was a month before we spoke again, really spoke. I was working late on a Friday night, the building nearly empty, when I found myself in the small library on the 3rd floor, researching precedents for a bill Patterson was co-sponsoring. I was so absorbed in a legal text from 1973 that I didn't hear anyone come in until a voice said, "You're here late." I looked up to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly muscular forearms. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. "Could say the same about you," I replied, and then immediately worried I'd been too familiar. But he smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face. He looked younger, more vulnerable, almost boyish. "Can't sleep," he admitted, walking into the library and closing the door behind him. "Too much on my mind. Thought I'd do some reading, clear my head." He moved to the shelf near where I was sitting, scanning the spines, and I tried to focus back on my book, but I was hyper-aware of his presence, of the sound of his breathing, of the way his fingers traced along the book spines. "What are you working on?" he asked, pulling out a volume and settling into the chair across from me. The library suddenly felt very small, very intimate, just the two of us in the warm lamplight. I told him about Patterson's bill, about the research I was doing, and somehow we fell into a conversation about law and policy and the ways the system was broken. He was brilliant, I realized, not just smart, but genuinely thoughtful, with a nuanced understanding of how power worked and how it could be wielded for good or ill. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily, punctuated by long, comfortable silences where we'd both read, existing in each other's space like it was the most natural thing in the world. Around midnight, I looked up from my notes to find him watching me, his expression unguarded in a way I'd never seen. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just, you remind me of why I got into this work. The idealism. I'd forgotten what that felt like." There was something sad in his voice, something lonely, and before I could think better of it, I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "You haven't lost it," I said. "I've watched you in committee. You still fight for what's right." His hand turned under mine, his fingers threading through mine, and we sat there like that, holding hands across a library table in an empty building, two people who barely knew each other, but somehow understood something fundamental. "Daniel," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I should tell you I'm not. I can't." He stopped, struggling with words in a way that seemed foreign to this man who made his living with language. "There are things about me, things that could ruin my career if they came out, things I've spent my whole life hiding." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. I know, I said softly. I suspected. Marcus, I'm gay too. Saying it out loud to him felt like stepping off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I've never said it out loud, he whispered, never told another soul. My whole life I've been so careful, so controlled. And then you walked into me in that hallway, and something it broke open inside me. We left separately that night, careful as always, but we'd crossed a line we both knew we couldn't uncross. We started finding excuses to run into each other, started having these late-night conversations in empty offices and quiet corners. He told me about growing up in rural Pennsylvania, about knowing he was different from the time he was 12, about the girlfriend he'd had in college who he'd almost married because it was what was expected, about the loneliness of living a lie, of being whoever everyone needed him to be. I told him about my own coming out, the relief and terror of it, about my parents, who'd eventually come around but still didn't quite understand, about feeling like I was always watching myself, always aware of how I moved, how I spoke, what I revealed. 3 months after that night in the library, Marcus invited me to his apartment. It was a Saturday evening, and he'd texted me an address in Georgetown, nothing else. I stood outside the historic brownstone for 5 minutes, my finger hovering over the doorbell, knowing that if I pressed it, everything would change. He answered the door, in jeans and a soft gray sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "Come in," he said, and I stepped into his private world. The apartment was beautiful, all dark wood and leather furniture, walls lined with bookshelves, but it was also clearly the home of someone who lived alone, who'd gotten used to solitude. There were no personal photos, no indication of who really lived there. We had dinner, pasta he'd made himself, and I watched in fascination as this man who commanded Senate chambers moved around his kitchen with quiet competence. We drank wine, talked about everything except what we both knew was happening between us. After dinner, we sat on his couch, supposedly to watch a documentary, but neither of us was paying attention to the screen. "I'm terrified," Marcus said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. He was staring straight ahead, his hands clenched in his lap. Of what I feel when I'm around you. I've built my entire life on control, on never letting anyone see the real me. And you, Daniel, you make me want to tear it all down." I took his hand, felt him trembling. "You don't have to tear anything down," I said. "Not if you don't want to. We can take this as slow as you need." He turned to look at me then, and the vulnerability in his face nearly broke my heart. "I've never," he started, then stopped. "I've never let myself be with anyone. Not really. There were a few fumbling encounters in college, but nothing real." He was 43 years old, and he'd never let himself love anyone, never let himself be loved. I reached up and cupped his face with my hand, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "Then we'll figure it out together," I said, and I kissed him, soft and gentle, giving him every opportunity to pull away. Instead, he made a sound like something breaking open, and he kissed me back with a hunger that took my breath away, his hands coming up to tangle in my hair, pulling me closer. We made love that night, slow and tender and awkward in all the best ways. Afterward, lying in his bed with his head on my chest, I felt him crying silently, his tears warm against my skin. I held him, running my fingers through his hair, and he let himself break in a way I suspected he never had before. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know why but I shushed him gently. "You don't have to apologize for feeling things," I said. "Not here, not with me." And he held on to me tighter, like I was an anchor in a storm. That's how it started, our secret life together behind closed doors. To the world, Marcus remained the Ice King, the senator everyone feared, the man who never showed weakness. But in his apartment, in the quiet hours we stole together, he was just Marcus. He was gentle and funny and surprisingly playful. He'd make me breakfast on Sunday mornings, wearing nothing but boxer shorts and reading me articles from the newspaper. He'd fall asleep during movies with his head in my lap. He'd ask me about my day and actually listen, would hold me when I was stressed about work, would kiss me goodbye like he was memorizing the feel of my lips. We were careful, so careful. We never arrived or left together. We never touched in public. We never even looked at each other too long in the halls of Congress. It was exhausting and exhilarating and sometimes heartbreaking, this double life we were living. There were nights when I'd lie awake, watching him sleep, and wonder if love was supposed to feel like this, like joy and fear in equal measure. 6 months in, Marcus told me he loved me. We were in his apartment cooking dinner together, and he just said it, simple and clear. "I love you, Daniel Chen. I've never said that to anyone before, but I love you." And I said it back, because I did, because somewhere along the way this terrified, lonely, powerful man had become my whole world. The hardest part was knowing it couldn't last, not like this. Marcus was up for re-election, and there was talk of a presidential run. The scrutiny would only increase. We both knew that eventually we'd have to make a choice, and I was terrified of what that choice would be. It came to a head on a Tuesday in March, almost a year after we'd started seeing each other. Someone had taken a photo of us, nothing incriminating, just the two of us having coffee at a shop in Maryland, but sitting closer than colleagues should sit. Marcus's chief of staff showed him the photo, asked questions. Marcus shut it down, said I was mentoring him on outreach to younger voters, but we both knew it was a warning. That night in his apartment, Marcus was quiet, distant. "Maybe we should stop this," he said finally, not looking at me, "before someone gets hurt, before it ruins both our careers." I felt like he'd punched me in the chest, but I understood. Of course I understood. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He closed his eyes, and I saw him warring with himself, saw the politician and the man fighting for dominance. "No," he whispered. "God, no. But I don't know how to do this, how to be who I am and have you too." And then he was crying, really crying. And I held him like I had that first night, whispering that we'd figure it out, that we'd find a way. We decided together that he would come out, but on his own terms when he was ready. It took another 3 months of planning, of Marcus working with advisors he trusted, of preparing for the fallout. I offered to step back, to let him do it without me being part of the story, but he refused. "You're the reason I'm brave enough to do this," he said. "I'm not hiding you, not anymore." The press conference was on a Monday morning in June. I watched from the back of the room as Marcus Hale, the senator everyone feared, stood at a podium and told the world who he really was. His voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as he spoke about living in fear, about the cost of hiding, about wanting to serve his country as his authentic self. And then he said my name, looked right at me in the back of that room, and said, "I'm in love with a man named Daniel Chen, and he's taught me that strength isn't about hiding who you are. It's about having the courage to be seen." The fallout was intense. We lost some supporters, gained others. Marcus's poll numbers dipped, then slowly climbed back up. There were hate letters and death threats, but there were also letters from people thanking him, telling him he'd given them courage. We've been together for 3 years now. We have a house in Arlington, nothing fancy, just a place that's ours. Marcus didn't run for president, but he won re-election, and he's become one of the most effective advocates for LGBTQ rights in the Senate. People still call him tough, still respect his authority, but they also see his humanity now. Last week, we were having dinner at home, just a quiet Tuesday night, and I watched him reading briefing notes at the table, his reading glasses sliding down his nose, completely relaxed. He looked up and caught me staring. "What?" he asked, smiling that private smile he saves just for me. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking about how far we've come." He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb rubbing over my knuckles, over the ring I've worn for 6 months now. "We have, haven't we?" he said softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I get to have this, have you." Outside those walls, Marcus Hale might still be the senator people fear and respect. But here, behind closed doors that aren't hiding anything anymore, he's just the man I love, gentle and strong, and finally, beautifully free. Total char count, 24,847.